And I'm Maggie Carey from Adelaide, and I'm part of Narrative Practices Adelaide, and I work have a private independent practice, I think you call it, and do a lot of teaching and a lot of supervision of young people.
And Maggie, I've always been a fan of your work since the very beginning of narrative practice, the way the papers you've written, and I've only, had you as a teacher in the more, kind of more recent years. And I was really thrilled 2 years ago when you presented here in Vermont and started talking about neurobiology and making these linkages. That felt like I was really excited to see how you were doing that, because I feel like you are, like for me, you're like a touchstone in like narrative practice, like so clear and consistent with the principles and practices, and you laid out very clearly, and then to bring the neurobiology into that was really thrilling for me, so I was really excited about that.
And I echo that. I've only known you through your work and sharing your work with students of mine over years, and it's just a real honor to be here and to experience you face to face. And and also was thrilled that you've been integrating neurobiology and some different ideas in a community that I feel like wasn't as open to those ideas many years ago.
And I think about Michael White and the way in which he drew from from philosophy, from sociology, cultural anthropology, feminism, and memory theory, Vygotsky, Russell Mears, learning theory,
loss,
and the impact of trauma. He was really into that stuff, and I think it is about seeing what all of those things contribute to practice, or how they support practice, or or give another rendering of practice, another way of thinking about what we're doing, and that amplifying. I like this.
Yes.
I like this. To really hold this understanding of the difference, that there is a separation between us as organisms, as our body, and a sense of selfhood, a sense of personhood, and that the biology has its life and it has its pathways and ways of working, but that the meaning of those stories, the meaning of what it is, what I'm about, who I am, as a sense of self, a sense of personhood, that can't be physically seen. It's a concept, and so that for me, that sense of selfhood is what comes from the stories, from our social, relational, political context, and those stories, those stories about who I am, they then influence the body. They impact and influence and shape, shape our experience. So. Michael was reading Deleuze in that last year, and a bit that he'd noted was this idea from Deleuze that in traditional sports, this is a sporting metaphor, in traditional sports through the time, there'd been practices of having to initiate effort, from a starting point, having to run or having to throw a javelin, or it's about, effort, resistance, overcoming resistance and pushing. But in the modern sports, Deleuze says, it's like windsurfing, surfing, hang gliding. It's about getting into something that's already there. It's getting into a wave,
a rhythm, finding
the thermal, to go. And I think this is such a great metaphor for our practice, to actually go with what's there, to be able to get into something. We don't have to initiate it. We don't have to push it and make it happen, but to be. And I think it is a tuning
Yeah.
of our listening,
Yeah.
of our noticing, of
Yes.
noticing what's happening for
Yes.
us in the room,
Yeah.
noticing the spark when the eye is gone, or
Yeah.
All those
and
things
go
that
with
are-
that, and
yeah.
go with that, and we go on amazing places.
Yeah,
Get
exactly.
taken with.
Yeah, I've really appreciated the way you've been bringing neurobiology into your work. I mean, I kind of feel like it's the way in which like the ideas of Vygotsky came into narrative, and we found them very compelling and useful. And now you're bringing neurobiology.
And
Ideas into
yeah,
the work.
but I think there's so much more that could be. I think these sort of opportunities to hear from each other and to I was saying to Lynn earlier, I'd like to just have some conversations with some of these neurobiologists. I like to have it go the other way as well. I just have a feeling that they would really respond to narrative practice as a way of making sense of brain function and things. But and how about